Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Bourbon Theory.
On location.
I'm Josh.
I'm Bill.
And like Dad said, we are on location here at good old Southern Grace Distilleries here in Mount Pleasant, North Carolina.
The former prison.
Got a big old group here with us. We're gonna go get checked in. I've been here a couple of, a dozen times.
Yeah.
Dad, on the other hand, has only been here
I've
a couple.
I think it's been my fourth time, something like that.
So let's check out the gift shop.
We're going to be a little bit different than pretty much every other distillery that you go to. Biggest difference being we occupy a nearly 100-year-old abandoned prison campus. This was formerly Cabarrus Correctional Center, a minimal security men's state prison. The building on the other side here this was the mess hall that we were just in. We'll pass by the barrel house where the music is playing, and that'll be our final stop on the tour prior to tasting. But that was the original jailhouse there, constructed in 1927. It opened for visitors in 1929 and confined those visitors against their will all the way through December of 2011. That building was meant to house 100 inmates, 50 in the eastern cell block, 50 in the west. At the time of closure, over 215 men in that building alone. Pretty constant theme out here was that of overcrowding and also understaffing. To alleviate some of that overcrowding, in 1987, what is now our production building, and where we'll spend the bulk of our tour today, was constructed to house an additional 240 inmates in 4 60-man pods or dormitories. At the time of closure, over 400 men in that building. If they wanted to build any new infrastructure to either disperse the inmates or to house any new ones, all of the original 1920s architecture from this half of campus would have needed to have been renovated, brought up to modern jail code. Just would have been a logistical nightmare. It would have cost the state too much money. So they made the decision to pull the plug. From the time that decision was made to the time that everyone, inmate and guard and staff alike, was out was less than 2 weeks. So our first couple weeks in here to first couple months were largely spent cleaning up and making it a habitable space for our production facility there. Now, a little bit about Southern Grace ourselves. We actually opened our doors in 2014 in downtown Concord in the old Warren Coleman Mill building. At that time, making nothing but our signature 130 proof Sundog corn whiskey. About as close as you can get to a real backwoods Appalachian moonshine while still paying your taxes on it, acquiring it through illegal means. We're one of the few distilleries out there willing to pay that proof gallon tax to put our corn whiskey out at an authentic proof point there. So if you do like a classic Appalachian style moonshine, it is delicious. After about 2 years doing that, our co-founders were talking amongst themselves and decided that they wanted to try their hand at aging some whiskey and making bourbon. We needed a lot more space than what we had to have somewhere to put our barrels. So we started doing some shopping around. The town of Mount Pleasant actually caught word of this and approached us with this campus, probably thinking to themselves, we're going to pawn it off on some suckers. Who else is going to want this abandoned jail campus? And joke's on them. We showed up, took a tour around, and thought, yeah, it'd be pretty cool to run some whiskey out of here. So we purchased it, moved in Labor Day weekend of 2016, put down barrel number 1, January 9th of 2017. So just had its 9-year birthday. Happy birthday, barrel number 1. And we have been the whiskey prison ever since. We like to be as transparent, open, and honest as possible here. Feel free, take pictures, ask questions. The fact of the matter is we're not space age here. We're not doing anything on this campus that people haven't been doing in this region at this point for hundreds of years. So we like to say you could take a Prohibition era moonshiner or earlier, stick them in front of our setup, whether that's fermentation or distillation. They'd be familiar with what's going on. They could run whiskey with relative ease. So with that being said, we're going to head over to the production facility where we will do the bulk of our tour there. It is raining a little bit, so I'll try and keep you guys out of the rain as much as possible today. But we can start heading that way now. Right in front of us here, recently got a facelift. It looks a lot prettier now than it did when we moved in. This was the superintendent's house. We did not have a warden out at this facility because, who knows, would have been too easy to understand, I guess. We had a superintendent, functionally the same role. Mount Pleasant, still kind of in the middle of nowhere. Back in the 30s and 40s, it was actually the capital of nowhere. And so one of the ways the state tried to encourage people to come and work as superintendent was to provide housing. And that's all well and good until the superintendent decides he wants to start a family. At that point, you know, maybe not the best place to bring up the young ones, right on the yard of the prison here. Might be getting some misguided advice from the neighbors through the fence. So he moved out in the late 50s, and this was converted into a bit of an intake facility there. They had 2 holding cells, fingerprinting, mugshot, that kind of thing. Up in the guard tower here, we have Jim Bob on his eternal watch. 0 escaped convicts since Jim Bob began his reign. So thank you, Jim Bob, for that. Now, while this was a minimal security prison or minimum security prison, that does not mean that we didn't have serious offenders here. In the state of North Carolina, minimal security just means you're within 4 or 5 years of your release date and you haven't done anything to warrant needing to remain in a higher security facility. So we had people here from theft and DUI, ironically bootlegging, all the way up to murder. Just meant that in the eyes of the judicial system, they were on their way to becoming a reformed member of society. Yes, we got real prison real quick as we come into this building. We did have to make some modifications, obviously, to house our production facility here, but we tried to maintain as much of the original architecture as possible. So, as we file inside here to the atrium, we have our 4 pods or dormitories, starting with F over here for fermentation. We also have D dorm for distillation, B for bonded storage, and G for general storage. Look at us, we are so creative. Each of these pods meant to house 60 inmates at the time of closure, over 100 in each of them. We did not have individualized cells like you may expect, you know, when you see on TV or in the movies. It was more in the style of the military barracks, where they all had their bunks in the same room. Guards locked that up at night, said sleep tight ladies, and came back and get them the next morning. Some of those beds were still here conveniently when we moved in. They were stacked 3 high and about 18 inches apart. Heat in the winter, no air conditioning in the summer. Use your imagination, 400 sweaty dudes in here in the middle of North Carolina in July. It's probably not a fun time. So it's a lot more fun, smells a lot better now than it did then. Now, each pod would have their sleeping quarters. They also shared a restroom area which had 4 showers, 4 toilets. Start a stopwatch, I don't know what to tell you. And then these rooms that have the windows along them were a type of day room or a lounge area that they'd have access to at certain times of the day. They also had a television in there, so kind of just a relaxing space for them. Now, starting with our process here, like I said, we like to be as transparent, open, and honest as possible. I'll straight up tell you, our mash bill consists of just 2 grains. It is 88% corn, 12% malted barley. We use no wheat, no rye, and all of our grain is locally sourced from North Carolina farmers. So our corn comes from Barrier Family Farms right here in Cabarrus County. It's about 5-10 minutes up the road. And then for our malted barley, we utilize a company called Carolina Malt House, and they pull from several different farms over in the western part of the state. That barley just grows a little bit better at a slightly higher elevation. Now, when we're ready to begin our fermentation process, in comparison to other distilleries or even some big breweries, when you walk into their fermentation area, you're likely looking at just a wall of stainless steel and, you know, an 8,000-gallon mashing tun or whatever it may be. We don't have anywhere to put one of those on campus right now, so the way that we supplement or the way that we handle our fermentation is the way they did it back in the day, the way the moonshiners did it back in the day, the way they're still doing it to this day. We utilize just 55-gallon mashing drums here. So, when we're ready to begin fermentation, our fermentation specialist Taylor will grab a couple of those guys, pour in our milled corn, and then near boiling water. That near boiling water can help soften up the kernel of that corn, extract some of the natural sugars that are contained within that kernel or that grain as well. That mixture will be stirred intermittently every 10 to 15 minutes until it cools to around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. At that point, we will add in our yeast, our malted barley, and a little bit of what we call backset. Now, backset is this reddish brown liquid that's in these 2 containers here that looks a lot grosser than it actually is. This is just what's left over in our pots after we've done a run of whiskey. You can think of it kind of like a sourdough bread starter, being that it's very highly acidic. It's full of dead yeast from previous batches. And when added into our sweet mash, it helps to create a more optimal environment for that yeast to begin working, kind of kickstarts that fermentation process. Another added benefit of the implementation of this back set is because we're pot stilling and we're truly batch by batch distillation, helps to create consistency moving from one to the next using a bit of the prior batches. The implementation of this back set into our mash makes our whiskey what we call a sour mash whiskey. Now, if for whatever reason you get really, really deep into the history of whiskey making like I have, you will come across several instances of, to quote the great Bob Ross, happy little accidents where we aren't exactly sure kind of who, what, where, when, why, how some of these processes in whiskey making started or began. One such thing is the sour mash process, where depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. If you ask the good folks over at Jim Beam and Beam Suntory, they're going to say, it was Dr. James Crowe, a Scottish chemist or whatever he was. And they would say that. They own the brand, so they have a financial incentive to say that. But in all reality, no, it was very likely not James Crowe. Now, I will give him his flowers in a large-scale industrial manufacturing sense. His implementation of the sour mash process was quite revolutionary, but it had been in use for generations before he was a twinkle in his father's eye. It's one of those things where we're not exactly sure where it came from. We're here now, and we're happy for it. It's pretty much the industry standard now. There are a few notable exceptions. The big two right now, I'd say, in the whiskey game are your Kentucky Peerless and Hard Truth, doing the strictly sweet mash. And they do it excellently well, but they'll let you know that it's sweet mash because they're sacrificing a little bit of money in order to do that. But pretty much everyone else that you come across uses the sour mash process. Once we've got that back set into our mash, that mixture will continue to be stirred intermittently until it cools to room temperature. At that point, we can cap it, throw it back into fermentation storage, and let it rest for about a week to a week and a half. During that time, obviously, that yeast is working. It's feeding on those sugars, creating ethanol as a byproduct. If you were to go into the fermentation room after that week, week and a half, swing the doors open, walk in, take a big inhale in. Ooh, it smells pretty good. It smells pretty good. It's like some fresh baked banana bread in there with brown sugar. It's quite nice. If you were to get a little overzealous, walk over to one of those mashing drums, take the lid off, lean in and get a whiff. Now we're going to start to get the idea. It's going to singe your nose hairs a little bit. What began as water, grain, and yeast is now what we call our distiller's beer or our wash. And that is what's in this container on this side of the door. And this straw-colored liquid here. It's about 10 to 12% alcohol by volume. If you did a glass in there, took a sip of it, it's pretty good. It tastes like a pretty nice craft ale. Again, 10 to 12% alcohol by volume. You could bottle it right there. You can drink it. It's going to get you across the finish line. But we're looking to take this large volume of relatively low alcohol percentage liquid and squeeze it down into a very low volume of high percentage alcohol through distillation. Once our fermentation is finished, we'll strain off our spent grain. We collect that, donate it to local farmers in the area. They feed it to their livestock. If you ever drive through Harris County and see a cow out in the field, kind of stumbling their way along, we may be the enablers there, but we're big boys and girls that can handle themselves. And the farmers tell us that they really enjoy grain day when it comes from Southern Grain. So, next step will be in distillation. We can head that way now. I do like to point out before we go inside, we run our stills 4 days per week, Monday through Thursday, 1 time per day. Our total yield from the heart section of our run is about 53 gallons worth of distillate. So we're running about 1 barrel's worth of bourbon or whiskey every time that we run our stills. In that sense, we are a true craft distillery. Do not let the good folks up at A. Smith Bowman in Fredericksburg, Virginia tell you that they're a craft distillery. We love them. Great folks, great tour, great whiskey. When you're owned by the Sazerac Company, one of the largest companies on the planet, and you're sourcing your mash from Buffalo Trace, are we really a craft distillery at that point? Just saying. No shade there. They are excellent folks and they make great whiskey. Definitely worth going if you're ever in the area. Now, as we head into distillation here, keep in mind, back in 2010, every evening there were nearly 100 inmates or over 100 inmates bunking down in this room. Not a whole lot of fun. Today it houses our 2 pot still setups here. They are identical, just on different scales. We have
Different
over here,
picture.
smaller of the two, Keith Richards and his compatriot, Fats Domino, down there. The run on Keith takes about 7.5 hours, and we're looking at 10 to 11 down there on Fats. You've ever thought about getting into distilling? You know, maybe watch moonshiners or something the first couple times. It's pretty fun. Lose
What you're
the
expecting?
cluster the bulk of your day.
What you expected?
It's fun the first couple times. Loses cluster a little bit. Now, the one thing that we did have to change with our still setups that may be a little foreign to our Prohibition era moonshiner is that the fire marshal was not super keen on us burning locust wood or dogwood under the still, so we did have to electronically heat them. But if we could figure out, just reaching back here, we have 4 light switches to turn on. That would turn on the 8 burners in our pots here. And with your running whiskey. So, when we're ready to distill, our assistant distiller or master distiller will pump in our wash into our pots. If need be, we can top those off with a combination of heads and tails from previous batches. That's largely what's in these stainless steel containers lining the room here. The heads and tails contain good, perfectly safe to drink alcohol. They can just be off in terms of color, aroma, or flavor. So I don't want to put my name on it in a final product, but we can harvest it, throw it back into the setup, redistill it, and try and squeeze as much of that good alcohol out as we can. We just want it to come through the heart section of the run when it's crystal clear, it smells crisp, or it smells good and tastes like a full body, full flavored corn whiskey. If need be, I already said we'll top those off with heads and tails. Our thump kegs will be filled exclusively with heads and tails, only second use distillate, and these guys, no new wash will go into those thump kegs there. Now, inside of our pots, we have a solution that not only contains ethanol, obviously alcohol, but also contains water, grain oil, and yeast that have been brought over from our mash. We're just trying to separate out the ethanol from the rest of that solution. Luckily for us, ethanol has a much lower evaporation point. It's about 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Our first target temperature on these pots, therefore, is around 175. At that point, our ethanol will become volatile, become vapors, travel up the column of our still here, and when we reach the elbow there, we encounter what we call the reflux effect. That ethanol vapor is a little over 170 degrees. The copper metal in the elbow there is not. So when that hot vapor comes in contact with that cooler metal, it'll recondense, run back down the column of the still there. It gives us a little bit of extra distillation right at the beginning of the run. Now, the reflux effect isn't something that we are counting on, to improve the quality of our whiskey. It's more a byproduct of the system, but it does give me an opportunity to talk about redistillation. Every time that you redistill an ethanol product, you are getting closer and closer to pure ethanol, essentially, to rubbing alcohol. This is why if you go to the ABC store, you walk down the vodka aisle, you will see very prominently and proudly displayed 7 times distilled, 10, 12 times distilled, whatever it may be, and that's great for a vodka that kind of already tastes like rubbing alcohol as it is. When it comes to whiskeys, and particularly bourbons, we want to maintain as much of that characteristic grain flavor as we can. We want that rich, sweet flavor from our corn to come through in our final product. So for that reason, kind of industry standard is either a double or triple distillation. We utilize a triple distillation here. We get 1 in our pots and then 1 in each of our thumb kegs. Different distilleries make great whiskeys with both methodologies. It's really up to personal preference on that one. Now, the reflux effect is really only lasting about 10 to 15 minutes. At that point, that metal will heat up enough for our vapor to travel over into our first thump keg or doubler. Way back in the day, the old wives' tale was that every time you went through a doubler, it doubled your proof. Doesn't do a thing. Would be excellent for us if that were the case. For us, it allows us, 1, to get that extra distillation, but also to get more alcohol in the system as a whole. The pipe on the left here is about 3/4 of the way down in the thumb keg. On the right, just inside of the roof there. Initially, as that starts to flow into the first thumb keg, it's a very loud, boisterous rolling sound. Sounds like a train coming down the tracks. It's very, very loud in this end of the building for a couple minutes during that time. Once it settles in, it's a very slow, rhythmic, thumping noise, hence the name thumping keg. Important to note, we only have one source of heat in either of our setups here, and those are the 4 burners in the bottom of each pot. This is a setup entirely driven by heat. It is not enclosed or under pressure at any point in time, so that is important to know. But that vapor will mix in here. As soon as that mingles and heats up to 170 or around that temperature, we'll redistill, travel into our second thumb keg, repeat the process. We are now 3 times distilled. Go us. Following that, we'll head into our condensers here. We didn't get to see it because we kind of cut through the building, but right outside on the other side of this wall here, we have a very large, essentially a giant water cooler, and then our chiller, which is that noisy device you hear running out there, cools our water down to about 40 degrees Fahrenheit, recondenses our hot ethanol vapor back into liquid distillate. It'll run out the bottom here in these funny looking devices that we call our distiller's parrots. Inside of here, we have a hydrometer that'll give us a quick and dirty estimate on our proof. And from there, we can begin to make our cuts. Now, we make 4 cuts here at Southern Grace. A traditional moonshiner would likely only make 3, and they would combine our first cut with the first quarter to a third of our second cut, and they would toss all of that off together. Granted, they were a moral and upstanding moonshiner. Due to a combination of both a more intimate understanding of our setups, but also a better understanding of distillation science, we are now able to make the distinction between what we call our 4s or our 4 shots and our heads. So if you heard me earlier say that the heads are safe to drink and you got a little nervous, this is why. So the first thing that will run off the still will be what we call the 4s or the 4 shots. You can see this kind of has a greenish tinge to it, and it's also got a little bit of a cloudiness in there as well. If you've ever heard of anybody getting sick, going blind, drinking backwoods whiskey, this is your culprit right here. As this contains a dangerous chemical component known as methanol. As little as 15 milliliters of methanol can permanently damage your optic nerve. Go to the ABC store, you get an airplane bottle, that's 50. So less than a third of that makes it so we don't see so good anymore. Now, if anyone is brave and would like to smell it, don't drink it. 1, it's dangerous. 2, it's a felony. But if any of you like to pass that around, this stuff is quite high, sitting a little over 80% alcohol by chance, or right around 80% alcohol by volume. It is quite strong. Being that it's that high of proof, not only is it a volatile liquid, meaning it could in theory ignite and explode, but it is also antiseptic. It'll kill germs and bacteria. And for that reason, we do collect our 4s and we use it for various cleaning purposes in and around the distillery. I'll use Keith as a reference for the volume on each of our cuts here. Our 4s, only about half a gallon. So really not a whole lot of that methanol is coming through, but absolutely paramount that we get that out before we do any bottling or aging.
Yeah. 60, 80, yeah. That'll water it.
Little tang.
Yeah, a little tang. Now, the next thing that'll run through our still will be our heads. The heads have lost that greenish tinge, but still have a little bit of a cloudiness to it. The heads on the nose starting to clean up into a corn whiskey smell, but it's still got like an astringency to it. It's like somebody soaked a marker in it for a couple minutes or something. It's just not quite there. Safe to drink. I don't want to put my name on it, but we'll harvest it, throw it back into the thumb kegs there, and try and squeeze what we can out of it. Our heads, we're looking at a yield of 1 to 3 gallons off of this setup, and that variability is very heavily dependent upon what goes into our thumb kegs. If you think about it, we have a set volume inside of each of those thumb kegs. If we fill it with heads that are inherently, 160 proof and 80% alcohol, we have much more ethanol in the system than if it's more tails heavy, where it's 100 or less proof, and you're really you just have the same volume of liquid with less alcohol content in there. 1 to 3 gallons on that stuff. Following the heads, we will move into the hearts, the good stuff. Every single drop that goes into bottle or barrel here at Southern Grace Distilleries comes from the hearts section of our run. Only when our whiskey is at its absolute best will we use it for bottling or barreling. Now, on the nose here, we have really cleaned up into a bright, vibrant, sweet, or slightly fruity flavor profile there at 160 proof to begin. It's quite tasty. I've had it straight off of the still. You would expect it to just rip the back of your throat out with how hot it is. A good, well-made corn whiskey is not going to drink. I mean, it's going to drink warm. It's 80% alcohol, but it's not going to be, you've had cheap vodka that's harsher than that stuff. Yield on that guy, 13 to 14 gallons, and we're looking at about 40 down there on Fast Domino. That's where that 53 gallon total comes from. Following the hearts. At that point in the run, we've evaporated off most of the ethanol that's contained within the system, and the other components of our wash there are beginning to heat up over 230 degrees Fahrenheit. Our water, our grain oil is now beginning to push through towards the end of the run. Sir, the tails will take on a bit of a greenish tinge again, and if you see when I pass this around, if you look into the jar here on the top, there is this little green floaty guy in there. I'll say the line again, looks grosser than it actually is. That's just corn oil that's pushed through at the end of the run. Now the nose on the tails gets a little interesting. It picks up a little bit of kind of like a musty, damp, like funk to it. It's hard to describe the smell, but I can describe the flavor spot on. Imagine we're making a bowl of cereal, raisin bran, no raisins, just bran, and we're lactose intolerant, so we're filling the bowl with water. That's pretty much what it tastes like. It's a watery, grainy, kind of malty, one-dimensional, really not an offensive flavor, not like I think the nose is kind of off-putting, but I'll leave that kind of aspect to our Scotch drinkers of the world. I like my whiskey to be good. Yeah, I'm just kidding. Everyone's got their preferences, right? Scotch is just not for me personally. Yield on the tails there, 10 to 15 gallons, and again, that variability very heavily depending on what goes inside the mix. Once we've run down our tails to 30, 40 proof, whatever it may be that day, we will disassemble our thumb kegs there. We'll dump everything that's in there out. We've gotten everything that we can out of that second use distillate. Our pots will be drained. That's our back set that gets collected for future batches of mash. And the last thing that I get to say has to do with the materials that we make our stills out of. So this is our second happy little accident in whiskey making history. Distillation science in some capacity can be dated back like to the 11th century. The kind that we're talking about today, about 450 years ago with the implementation of pot stills and whiskey making in Ireland. Did they know at the time that copper had a beneficial quality on their whiskey? Absolutely not. They were using it because at the time it was relatively cheap, it was readily available, and it was malleable, so it was very easy for them to work with. Fast forward to today, and we find out, copper actually does improve the quality of your whiskey. So all of our stuff here is stainless steel on the outside, copper lined on the inside. I mentioned that inside of our pots there in our wash, we have yeast that's left over or brought over from our mash. Well, yeast, when it undergoes high stress environments like this, can release sulfuric compounds called sulfides. And sulfides carry with them that kind of nasty rotten egg smell and taste. Obviously, that's not something we want in our final product. Well, quirky little thing about copper, sulfides naturally bind to copper. So as your ethanol vapor is traveling through your still setup, carrying with it those negative flavor compounds, the copper is naturally stripping that away. Did they know that then? Absolutely not. We're here now. We're happy for it. God must like a glass of whiskey every once in a while. I mentioned that we had to do a little bit of renovation here when we moved in. You can tell kind of this wall over here versus the other three. We've made a couple modifications here. I had to knock out a couple walls. I was not here for it, but I've been told it was a very entertaining situation as a row of bricks would come down, hit the floor, and out would fly all of the arts and crafts that the inmates have so graciously stashed in said walls. You see some really artisanal work out of these guys. If we could just focus that into something productive, who knows what we could accomplish. But
you should have used it in your labels.
Yeah, we have a shank display that unfortunately a shank display. Unfortunately, somebody knocked it off the wall, so it's not hanging at the moment. But we at least have it up in the museum section over in Salisbury.
I need it.
Yes, I will show you some pictures. Yeah, actually, Emily might be able to just straight up show you. Anyways, our record keeping at this facility prior to kind of the 70s and 80s, prison reform of the 70s and 80s, around the time of this building's construction, was a little bit shoddy. This was a good old boy prison in the South in the middle of nowhere, so records weren't kept, went missing, eyes wide shut kind of thing. Around the time of this building's construction, then we got on the straight and narrow, and that is where my favorite prison break story from this facility comes from. Not nearly as exciting or romanticized as you see on TV or in movies, but it is a little bit funny. So, I mentioned that these rooms with the windows along them were a type of day room or a lounge area. They had a television in there. Well, here we are in the mid-90s in this building. We find ourselves two inmates who are arguing amongst themselves over what they are going to watch on said television that evening. And they are not coming to a consensus. But instead of fighting about it, they come up with a plan. The plan was only ever viable because of how overcrowded and understaffed it was. So the plan was to that day go out in the yard, hop the fence, break out of prison, run up Dutch Road here, break into someone's home, steal their TV, run back down the road with the television, hoist it over the fence, bring it inside, pop it in the wall, problem solved. Now, say what you will, they came back, they knew they needed to be in here, they just both wanted to watch their shows, and clearly this was the easiest way to accomplish that. Somehow they're not seen leaving or coming back with the television. Plan goes off without a hitch, doesn't last long. There's this big long, won't call them beautiful because they certainly aren't that, windows along each of the day rooms, so the first guard to walk by takes one look inside, which is not supposed to be there. And they both ended up in solitary confinement for their efforts. Keep in mind as well, mid-90s here, we're not talking about throwing a flat screen under the arm, we're talking about the fatback CRTs. Like, you had to want it, dude. Want it, they did. So, it's a very, very Mount Pleasant prison break there. Continuing with our other two dorms, bonded storage over here primarily houses both our cask finishing room as well as our special order items for the state of North Carolina. If anyone knows the North Carolina AC warehouse,
Get that big barrel there. That's the
so products in the warehouse that would be excellent. They tell us that they're full and then have no drops on the credit notes to buy for 8,000 cases. I get it, they're $1 billion company, but it would be nice. Other side here is general storage, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's boxes, bags, labels, corks, bottles, barrels, empty, full, old, new, and everything in between. Most important thing over there is our dump table when we're ready to do some bottling. Get the barrel jack, twist the barrel up there, knock the bung out. Send it through our sophisticated, state-of-the-art filtration system, which is 2 pieces of cheesecloth at intersecting angles, just trying to get the biggest bits of barrel guts out. When we say uncut, unfiltered, we mean it. If you ever see a little spit of dust in the bottom of your bottle of conviction, just a little bit of charcoal does the body good, builds strong bones. Don't worry about it.
Fiber.
It is completely harmless. Yeah, exactly. Once we've collected what we dump out of our barrels there, we will head into our bottling facility. Now, if you guys haven't picked up on it by now, we're not, Heaven Hill, Buffalo Trace Makers Mark. We're a little bit smaller than those guys. Biggest difference, or, that's very, very noticeable in our bottling facility here, where our pinnacle of technological innovation is our automatic fill station that will fill a whopping 4 bottles at a time to either 375 or 750 milliliters. After that, it is human assembly line time. Next person's putting the cork into the bottle, the tack stamp over the top. Next person putting on the tamper-proof seal, heat gunning that over your cork. The next person in line, if the label is not already on the bottle, got to put the label on by hand, because let's be honest, who wants to drink out of a round bottle? You can just put an automatic labeler and have it roll them on hundreds or thousands at a time. No. The square bottles look cooler, so we got to put those on with the personal automatic labelers there. And then finally, the last person in line who, thank Lord, this is never me. You will never hear me complain about this. Somebody with nice, neat handwriting. Because in all of our infinite wisdom, we've decided to do just about everything as a single barrel and everything at cask strength. Means no 2 batches are ever going to be exactly the same. So somebody has to handwrite on every single label, your barrel number, proof, and alcohol by volume. After that, they're packed into cases, taped up, go onto a pallet, and shipped off to wherever their destination may be, whether that's a North or South Carolina warehouse or our direct-to-consumer company, the Barrel Station, based out of Nashville, Tennessee. They're awesome. They've been really, really cool with us. It's basically a $5 or less markup on MSRP, and then you just pay shipping. So they've been super awesome for us. In the cask finishing room, it's pretty sparse at the moment. The one big barrel against the far wall there is our Oloroso sherry cask sourced from Andalusia, Spain. The only bourbon product that we still have that is sub 4 years is the Oloroso sherry cask finish that we have currently. We're looking to change that as soon as that gets locked. We'll talk now a little bit about our barrels. All of these barrels you see in front of you with kind of the dark banding, also the ones that when they're finished, they look a bit more rustic. These are our new barrels from our new cooperage we swapped in 2021. Around 2020, 2021, a lot of people got stuck at home for some reason, and a lot of them got this funny idea that they should also,
That's how we all met.
they should also make whiskey. You know, how selfish of them. No, I'm just kidding. But we did swap in 2021 to our new cooperage. This is the, Speyside cooperage out of Atkins, Virginia, Southwest Virginia here. We're using a number 4 char and a medium toast on these American white oak barrels. Prior to 2021, we were with the Barrel Mill out of Avon, Minnesota, and those were a number 3 char American white oak no toast.
So all char 4 from now.
From now, yes, absolutely. Yeah, it slows down your aging a little bit, but I think gives you a more robust flavor in the end. Yeah, so number 4 char, heavy char, alligator skin char, it's around 50-ish seconds worth of char time. Used to be one of the heavier of the char levels. Now people are like, yeah, I got a char 12. It's like, dude, it's a pile of ash at that point. But that is how we are. Any questions in bottling or cask finishing, anything like that?
No, you're nailing
You
everything.
said everything is 4 years?
Everything now, bourbon-wise, is 4 years, except for that Oloroso sherry cask. Everything else is minimum 4 years. Well, let's head through solitary confinement. If anyone wants to get a mug shot or a picture behind bars, that would be the spot to do it. The cell straight away, you can go in, close the door. It's welded so that it won't lock on you. If you get in there, slam the door, and somehow it does lock, probably divine intervention. You probably deserved it, but the fire department's right down the road. They get here real quick. We'll get you out. Solitary, largely used for relatively minor offenses here, being that we were a minimal security prison. If you did something crazy, you got in a big fight, stabbed or killed somebody, you would only be in solitary until your transport arrived to send you back up to medium. They're not going to babysit you in solitary for months at a time. The one art and craft that we do have on display is our toilet paper, we'll call it a rope, that was donated to us. It was confiscated by guards, I believe he said in the late 90s. And he said when they confiscated it, him and another guard took it and they pulled on it. They said it absolutely would do perform its intended goal.
Get on the shitter, Lee.
And it's made from prison toilet paper, so it's like half ply, so that's even... But that's a lot.
Now act like you're asleep so we can put the pink hat on you.
Oh, yeah, it's tightly.
Question.
Yes.
When did this take place?
December of 2011. Funny story about that. I was giving a tour back in July or August. If we do a little history lesson, back at the turn of the 20th century in the state of North Carolina, there were essentially 2 tiers of justice. If you did something particularly egregious, state penitentiary. Otherwise, you were working a chain gang. They'd load you up in a boxcar, ship you out somewhere where they determined you need to be doing hard manual labor, digging ditches, busting up rocks, flattening ground, whatever it may be. And then at the end of the day, you had the absolute privilege of either pitching a tent at your job site, or they load you back up in a boxcar, throw a padlock on it, say, sleep tight, ladies, come back and get you the next morning. Well, in 1925, the state of North Carolina had a change of heart, and they said, you know what? No more sleeping on the side of the roads. We are going to house our working inmates. How noble. So they slapped this exact motif all over the state of North Carolina, used the same blueprint, similar to how they did our lighthouses on the coast. And at the same time they did that, they changed the way they handled punishment for their working inmates. Whereas prior, if you were at your job site and they determined that you required some judicial discretion, they would tie you to a post or to a tree, and they'd give you lashes. Well, state of North Carolina deemed that to be cruel and unusual punishment. So what was their solution to said cruel and unusual punishment? Naturally, something crueler and more unusual. That would be this lovely building right down here. That is the hot box or the hole. It's one of only two still standing in the state of North Carolina. They were all ordered to be torn down in the late 50s because, let's be honest, it's a torture chamber. You'll notice there are chimneys on the roof there. There were two wood-burning stoves that could be loaded from the rear. They would only light those up in the spring and summer months. They would not warm you up on a day like today. They'd let you freeze. It was dirt floors at the time. 30-day minimum sentence, routinely between 120 and 130 degrees with the furnaces on. If they liked you, they'd give you a chamber pot to do your business in. If not, dirt floors, dig a hole, figure it out. Alrighty, welcome into the barrel house, everyone. We are now standing amidst roughly 750 barrels of bourbon, a market price somewhere between $6.5 and $7 million. And boy, it would be excellent if we could turn all this into money right now. But kind of the beauty and the pain of whiskey making is you make it, you got to put it up, you got to wait on it, and it's ready when it's ready. For example, we have two barrels sitting right here on this first rack in the middle. They were distilled from the same batch of mash. They were distilled on subsequent days, went into the barrel on the same day, and went up on the rack right next to each other on the same day. One of those barrels could take 6 months or longer than the other to reach full maturity. That much is out of our control. There's only so many factors that you can, or variables that you can account for when you're aging whiskey. Obviously, you have the grains in your mash bill. You have your distillation process, the type of wood and char level and everything like that you use, and then where you stick it. Beyond that, it is really up to the big JC. Whatever he says goes. Everything from temperature fluctuation, humidity, airflow, barometric pressure, how closely packed it is with other barrels. All of these things impact the way that your whiskey ages over time. Our co-founder, Thomas Sackert, likes to say we make whiskey that tastes good off of the still, and then we trust the wood. And thankfully, the wood has been very kind to us. Now, we are in a very, very favorable or optimal climate to be aging whiskey, which is very, very nice for us, where we get nice hot summers and nice cold winters. Not too cold, however. If you subscribe to the Old Forester school of thinking, they believe below 20 degrees Fahrenheit that the wood to whiskey interaction ceases to occur. So what's their solution to that as a billion-dollar company? Well, they kick on heaters in their 20,000 barrel rickhouse and they warm it back up. Our solution to that issue is to do nothing and just happen to be somewhere where it doesn't really get below 20 degrees Fahrenheit very often. So very fortunate there. So I have here a stave from one of our 4-year single barrel bourbons. This dark brown line here is our barrel saturation point, or what some call the devil's cut. This is how far into the wood our whiskey made it in just 4 years. That is simply not possible in most other climates. That's not happening in Scotland or Ireland, and it's not happening, in most of the rest of the United States. We're kind of in that sweet spot there, extending out into Kentucky and southern Indiana as well. Now, kind of the elephant in the room with the barrel house is the music that we're playing. It's not just because we like to jam or the whiskey likes to jam. It's a process that is called sonic aging. So a little over a decade ago now, I believe it was 2014, there were several peer-reviewed studies conducted on the impacts of sound waves when aging whiskey. And what they found is that if you can reverberate the staves of your barrels with sonic waves, that creates micro motion or movement inside of the barrel that, over a couple days or a couple weeks really makes no difference. Over the span of 4 to 7 years has a tremendous impact. Just means that during that time aging, more of your whiskey inside of that barrel is getting to interact with that wood than it otherwise would. So that also prevents us from having to have someone come in here every couple weeks or months pull all the barrels off of the rack here, spin them around, roll them up and down the aisle, read them a bedtime story, and tuck them back up on the rack. Somebody's full-time job would end up being barrel wrangler. We have, less than a dozen employees here, less than 10 that are here in, every week. So it would just kind of be a waste of time. So we supplemented that here with the sonic aging process. Now, the last thing that I have to say in our final instance of a happy little accident in whiskey making history has to do with the inside of our barrels and why they look like this. This is a stave from one of our double oak barrels, which is why our saturation isn't quite as far, only about 2 years in that barrel. But you can see at the bottom here a perfect example of our heavy char, or our alligator skin char, I prefer, as it looks like kind of the leather of an alligator there towards the bottom of that stave. So it is a legal requirement when making bourbon that the inside of your barrel has to be brand new charred oak. It does not have to be American white oak, but that is the industry standard.
Right.
It doesn't have to be, it has to be a container.
Yeah.
Yeah.
New vessel.
Absolutely, yeah. But how did that get its start? Who, what, where, when, why did that get its start? Well, depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. If you ask the good folks over at Heaven Hill, they're going to say, it was a Baptist minister by the name of Reverend Elijah Craig, and he was the first to char the inside of his barrels and therefore is the father of bourbon. That's a good story. It's a great story, actually. And when you're Heaven Hill, Kentucky Distilling Permit number 001, you might get a little leeway making a claim like that. In all reality, no, it was not Elijah Craig. It was all the more likely a gentleman by the name of Jacob Spears. That's really neither here nor there. If we're talking colloquialisms, what else might people say regarding the origins of charring the inside of our barrels here? Well, one person may say that it was an effort or they may dispute the Elijah Craig claim and say, Baptist minister building churches. No, what the heck are you talking about? No. It was an effort by American whiskey makers to appeal to the southern states like Louisiana, who had been heavily influenced by French culture. And the drink of choice down there was, of course, French brandy, which had been aged in a charred French oak barrel. So in an effort to appeal to that demographic and that market, American whiskey makers started aging their corn, rye, and wheat whiskeys in charred American oak barrels. Well, there's a little bit of credence there. The term bourbon actually comes from a French nobility. Bourbon Street down in Louisiana is not named after the spirit, and unfortunately, America's native spirit is named after a French dude. Kind of sucks, but it is what it is, Somebody else might say, French brandy, what the heck are you talking about? No. There was a fire at a cooperage in southern Indiana, and as a result of that fire, the coopers were forced to salvage staves that had been heavily damaged by the fire. And so they're almost regretfully assembling these disheveled, charred black barrels that they're almost ashamed to sell to people. They sell them, people buy and put whiskey in and come back 2 years later and go, it's actually pretty good. And even further still, somebody else might say, no. It was a bourbon maker in Bourbon County, Kentucky, who during a time of great shortage was forced to repurpose barrels that had previously held undesirables like fish and pickles. And in an effort to kind of get that smell and taste out of the wood, he requested that his barrels be heavily charred upon the inside. The fact of the matter is, we really don't know for sure, and I don't think that does anything to detract from the mystique, the allure, the legacy of bourbon as America's native spirit. In fact, I think it is the opposite and lends a bit of credence to it, as there's not one person we can go, that's the guy, that's exactly where it started. The fact that in essence, it could have been any number of families coming over to the New World, bringing with them their stills, setting down roots, growing grain, maybe to save it at the end of the year. They turned it into whiskey. They aged that whiskey in a charred oak barrel for the first time, and therefore bourbon as America's native spirit is born.